Hello, and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in work and in life and simplify them. And friends, we've been talking a lot about leadership and culture strategy these days. And I have to get a little bit giddy because I met this gentleman way back when in the last HR Southwest conference. The second I stepped into his room, I saw engaged people in the audience and, having real conversations about this stuff. And so I was like, oh yeah, we're definitely having him on the Simplifiers podcast. And the thing I want him to simplify today is how to build an entrepreneurial culture within HR teams. And why? Why is that a good idea? So my special guest today, his name is John Bernatovicz, and I am super excited for you guys to meet him today. He's a family-first business leader balancing roles as a husband, father, brother, coach, and competitive amateur golfer. In addition to being an entrepreneur and, of course, a podcast host, and he's also a speaker, a payroll expert, and I don't know, somehow he sleeps as well. But he's also the author of HR Like a Boss, and he's got a forthcoming book, Payroll Like a Boss. His passion is elevating purpose. And he's the president of Willery, a boutique professional services firm empowering the HR tech, payroll, and HR communities. So I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast. Hey, John, I'm glad you're here.
Mary, I'm so thankful that just a few months later after that presentation, which HR Southwest was so much fun, I had such a delightful time. It was really, really amazing. And the spirit and energy around that in the great state of Texas, which I'm heading to not too long from now to do another keynote presentation. I just feel so blessed by the spirit you bring and the work that you're doing, your preparation. For those of you listening to this does not happen by mistake. Mary is a pro's pro when it comes to podcasting. I can feel it. I actually am learning a few things of how I can become better as a podcast host, but I'm super thankful to be here and us to have a little fun dialogue about all things work and entrepreneurial mindsets and HR and payroll like a boss. Let's do it.
Yeah, 100%. And thank you so much for your kind words. You and I were both entrepreneurs. We think fast, we pivot fast, we make plans and we take action. And I don't know necessarily if everybody I've ever met who works in HR and cloud thinks in that way or sees the value of thinking in an entrepreneurial way. Now, you've built your career blending entrepreneurship and HR, but what does it actually mean for an HR team to have an entrepreneurial culture? And why do you think that matters right now more than ever?
The primary reason why I feel like it matters is the perception that the vast majority of non-HR professionals have of human resources inside of a business are task-oriented, they're tactical, they're hires and firers, they're compliance police. You can fill in all the blanks. We could get the visual of Toby from The Office. Is that overused as the worst thing that HR that ever happened to human resources is Toby from The Office? But in my mind, the reason why they feel that way is because perception at times is reality. And we in human resources are focused on putting out the fires. We are reactionary. And there are some very specific strategies that I have written in my book, that I presented in my keynotes, that I share in podcasts like this about how you can have an entrepreneurial mindset, how you can turn your job at your organization into a career that's just like you treating it as if it's your very own business. Because I don't know about you, Mary, but the moment that I moved out of corporate America into full-time entrepreneurship, I literally looked at myself in the mirror and said a bunch of curse words. What have I done? This is so hard. I have no manager. I have no corporate backing. I have no money. All of these things that I had when I safely was working at a large Fortune 100 company. And then all of a sudden I noticed I started to pivot how I got things done. I started to notice a different way by which I approached work. And then suddenly, Mary, I never felt like I had to go into my office. I never felt like I had to get those Sunday night blues. I wanted to go to work because I owned it. And I don't mean to share a comparison that maybe some of you can't relate to, but I can tell you for sure, I love my nieces and nephews. They're the greatest people in the world. I would give them anything I could. But the moment that my son Will and my daughter Mallory were born, my responsibility as a parent and caring for young people changed drastically. And I compare corporate America to being a great aunt and uncle versus having your own business or having an entrepreneurial mindset of having that full-time responsibility for your own child. Or if that's not something for you, maybe you own a cat or a dog, it's your very own thing. That relationship that you have and that responsibility is what I'm trying to encourage people in a corporate small business environment to start looking at their job in that way.
So let's break that down. Let's pull that thread a little bit more. I love that analogy of being that great aunt or uncle. What do those traits look like? What are the entrepreneurial mindset traits that are different than maybe how they're treating their job currently?
I'll start with two things, and these are the foundational principles of doing HR like a boss, or in my mind, anything like a boss. I'll first start with having an ownership mindset. And what does that mean? From my particular perspective, it simply means this. You cannot any longer point the finger at anyone else about something that goes wrong, bad, or not as planned at work. Even if you do not have full responsibility for it, an owner looks at what could I have done differently to make this better. An owner looks at things to say, how could I have predicted that this was going to take place, as opposed to laying blame on someone else in another department or some executive that made the decision. My greatest comparison to this, I'm a huge sports fan, Mary. I love Cleveland Browns, Cleveland Cavs, Cleveland Guardians, anything Cleveland sports. And I love when our team wins. It's more fun when the Cavs or the Browns win. And the coach gets interviewed after the game when they win and says, you must have thrown up a great game plan. It was really awesome to see the strategy put in place. And great coaches defer and deflect that responsibility off to the players. Our other coaching staff did great. Donovan Mitchell had a great game. Our star quarterback did this. Fill in the blank if they deflect. Now, on the opposite, when they lose and the game doesn't go as planned, or there's a bad call or something takes place with the referees or the other opposing team, what does that owner do? The exact opposite when they lose. They defer all and deflect all responsibilities back to them. I called a game. I called a poor game plan. I hadn't had my team prepared. We mismanaged this aspect. They don't blame the quarterback. They don't blame the wide receiver. They don't blame the referee. They take full ownership. And that is a significant pivot and shift. Please try it out for a day and see how it feels. That's number one. Number two, I truly feel like you must love what you do. If you are going to work every day and punching a clock and it is a means to the end, my guess is you probably don't love your vocation or career. Just a guess. But for those that do, there's a reason why the cliche exists. If you love what you do, you'll never work a day for the rest of your life. And I think having passion, having care and concern, understanding how your job connects to your inner purpose and making sure that it does. And if it doesn't, manufacturing a way to make it happen, or finding an employer that will value your passion and purpose so you can pour your heart into doing your job in an amazingly awesome way.
Yeah, let me back that up with some stats. The most recent Gallup Workforce Pulse survey of 2025, actually, in their survey, they realized that 27% of managers in U.S. corporations are feeling engaged at work. So the inverse of that is nearly 80% of managers are checked out. And 27% is the stat for managers. Guess what? Their direct reports, the level of engagement there, 20%. So there truly is 3 out of 4 of their direct reports are mentally not there. Just, delivering solid C- work. And I think that is a massive red flag. That's an epidemic that needs absolute attention and focus, no matter what role you play in HR, because your greatest asset at your company, in my opinion, is your human capital. It's not your products, not your services, not your customer list, in my opinion, because it's the people that deliver a world-class customer experience, that deliver those great products and services and innovate them. Wouldn't you agree?
Totally. And in the book, there's a 5-step business plan for doing HR like a boss. And at the very foundation of that, Mary, as a blogger and as a podcast host and doing all the great work that you do, one of the most amazing things that happened to me when I wrote my book was that I was able to do that because before writing my book, which was 74,000 words, it even makes me think to myself, I can't believe that when I say it out loud. The longest thing I had written prior to that was a 4-paragraph email. And the only book that I read as an adult, and this is an honest to God true story, was Who Moved My Cheese? Now, hold on one second. Who Moved My Cheese? Is that really a book? It's more of a pamphlet or a long blog, but it was effective. And the reason why I read it, because I was required to, and it was easy. But from that particular standpoint, having that perspective of not being able to do something and then all of a sudden being able to do it was such a gratifying experience. And in that became this idea of if you write down your ideas, you will realize that some of them are really bad. And I had a lot of really bad ideas that I wrote about in my book. But every once in a while, and there was one in particular, when I read back chapter 14, which is, as my friend Steve Brown suggests, you got to have a money chapter in your book. Chapter 14 of HR Like a Boss is that. It's how to treat your job like your very own business. We walk through the 5 pillars of the HR Like a Boss business plan, but right at the top is having a purposeful commitment. And when I read that back to myself, not just for yourself, but for your organization, what good are you going to try to do in the world? What is something you're going to accomplish that will make your community, your neighborhoods, your state, your country, the world a better place? Can we galvanize people around that idea? And then right after that was being people-centric. I think that in order for you to have a purposeful commitment, you must have a great group of people, and you as an organization must be people-centric. I have the quick test of are you people-centric or not, is if your CHRO or yourself, whatever role you're in, you go into your CEO's office, you knock on the door and you ask them, will you always put our people first before everything else? And watch their reaction. See what they say, because they're going to give you a tell, not only in their words, but in their actions after that. And I think if you don't have a people-centric organization that's purpose-driven, then my guess is you're missing the mark on the opportunity to get people to come to work in an engaged capacity, that they feel like if I do my job well, then we can do more good in the world because this organization has a purpose-driven, mission-driven mindset behind it.
Yeah. It breaks my heart to think that 80% of the workforce clocks in, clocks out just for a paycheck, doing the bare minimum and not enjoying the work that they're doing or even hitting their own full potential. And I think I want to go back to one thing you said earlier about ownership, because I also feel like, I've seen it with my HR colleagues before as well. You just are like, well, I don't really have the autonomy. I do have a checklist of things. I am constantly being told to put out fires. But this mindset shift starts with you, the individual, regardless of what outside circumstances are happening that are maybe beyond your control. But when you start to take personal ownership, that autonomy starts to grow on your own. And then you start to find the allies inside your organization who also think that way, right? It shifts from that compliance mindset to the ownership mindset, right?
Well, there's probably a reason why when we met at HR Southwest, there was some draw to you and I, because there are similarities in how we see this thing called work and entrepreneurial experience and having this love and passion for human resources. I think that's a beginning part of us having that draw. And as a result, you're galvanized to people that think in a similar way to you, not necessarily have to be like you, but they on important topics, there's some commonality, or if there's not, you can have healthy debate with them. My simple recommendation on, okay, how do you take an ownership mindset? How do I sit here? I'm in my job right now. I'm listening to this podcast during lunch because I can't leave. I want to learn from Mary and her guest, but I like, what do I do? My recommendation is a couple things. Number one, there's some foundational soft skills. If you're in the soft skills business, they call them power skills. And I've studied those things a lot, and I do a number of presentations around them. But what I would encourage you as a human being to do first is pour your heart into understanding how and where you are on your emotional intelligence journey. I don't think you can pivot and change any of these things about ownership, mindset, and love unless you are self-aware to know, why am I disgruntled going to work? Why do I get upset on Sunday nights? What are the reasons that I have control of that? That self-awareness is critical. Next, I think we need to be incredibly intentional about building relationships at work, being curious, being inquisitive, getting to know our neighbors and our other friends in other departments about them as human beings, not about the work, about their family, about their passion for going fishing or whatever trip they most recently took. Be inquisitive, be curious, lean into that. We also then, in my opinion, need to be problem solvers. The most successful leaders that I know can effectively manage themselves through problems. Now, all of a sudden, think about this. You're in this role, you're a little disgruntled, it's a means to an end, and all of a sudden you dial into your own emotions, you understand how to harmonize those in a positive way, you start responding to work things a little bit differently. Oh, good. Well, things are starting to happen in a positive way. Then you go and you start developing relationships and asking curious questions. You will then start to stand out from others inside of your organization because, no disrespect, if you're going to work and 75 to 80% of you are not engaged, you're not really happy. You just want to get through the day, and you probably don't care much about what Sally did on her spring break with her kids. And then the last thing I will share is that ability for you to attack problems. And even more so, those are issues, but don't look at problems just as the only way. What are opportunities we have in our business? What's a strength our organization, our HR function, our brand has that we have as a business have not perpetuated? We have not amplified. We have not poured gas on it to make it even more profound. And as you do all of that, the EQ, the problem solving, the relationship development, the last thing I will suggest is work on your clear and concise communication. Hosting a podcast, being a keynote speaker, the number one value that I have gotten as a human being is I've become, I hope, clearer, more concise, more direct with my communication. If you do those four things and no one notices, call me, because I want to hire you for whatever job that you're in right now, or place you at one of our clients, because that's some pretty badass HR, if you want my opinion.
Yeah. And, you know, these are excellent practical tips. By the way, anything that John or I talk about on this episode, you can always go back to the simplifiers.com, look at the show notes. You'll be able to click through and find all these details, especially if you're listening to this on the go. And I think that this is the thing. HR gets a bad rep, right? Oh, when people think about HR, they go, they're not really here for the people, are they? They're here for the policy police. They're here to keep the company outside of lawsuits. And I think these are practical shifts that leaders can start to make in order to move their teams from just enforcing rules, which is important for both safety of employee, when I think of health and safety, but also for the employer. But I like that shift of solving problems creatively and really building those strong relationships. That's where work actually gets done effectively, is your allies across the way, your cross-functional partners, your employee listening that you're doing, and building that trust and respect so that people will tell you, HR, over time, because you have to show and not just say, but build that trust over time. They will tell you in employee listening pulse surveys what's really wrong here and broken, and where could we optimize? And here are thoughts and ideas from my viewpoint on the front lines or in the corporate office or in retail that are tiny fixes that could actually make significant change. Then you're impacting the entire enterprise, not just you, the individual, and your employee experience, but everybody, right?
Totally. And I'll go back to your point, and we are so aligned on the fact that the engagement surveys, I would consistently see Gallup's come out with this varying number around 30%. And I did simple math. And every time I would go into a meeting with a client, I would try to look, who are the 7 people here that are not engaged?
Yeah.
And what I have realized is, having studied the Gallup 12 and having performed it within our organization for the last 5 or 6 years, there's one question on that gets me. Do you have a best friend at work? And the way they ask that question is very intentional, because a best friend at work is a major commitment. And I think of my son. My son is 18 years old. He's had his own lawn service for 9 years. He gets up every day in the summertime and works his business with one or two of his buddies. And then they go out after working and have some lunch or dinner or whatever the case is. They come back and shower, then they all get back together again. Now, I'm not suggesting you're going to do that at work, but he's working with friends doing something that he likes. And I don't have the exact poll or numbers, but I hear this anecdotally all the time. Mary, you can validate this point of interest or not. The number one thing that I believe is the primary complaint for people at work is other employees. I don't like Joe in accounting. I don't really care for our CEO. This person was mean to me, fill in the blank. The bane of your existence as an employee for the 77,000 hours you have to work on average is other people. But the number one thing that retirees miss the most when they retire, and it is to a person, when I ask them, what do you miss? I miss the people. There is something so uniquely wrong and right and such a unique opportunity and all that. And that's why one of the things I suggested earlier, tune into your EQ so you can be a better friend, build those relationships in a way, communicate clear and concisely, and help your colleagues solve the problems or amplify their unique opportunities they might have in their department or their business.
Yeah, 100% agree. And in your first book, HR Like a Boss, you actually list like 20 things that you must do first in order to be ready to go to work. Can you give me a couple of those?
Oh, gosh. You probably know them better, Mary. It's been a long time since I wrote that, but I'll be on the spot to answer. From my perspective, to be ready to go to work, I think, and this is simple, and I know there's a question further along that I'll preface in a minute. I've been working a lot on myself in the last 3 years. I recognize the fact that if I'm going to do this job as a promoter and influencer and supporter to inspire human resource professionals to do a really, really difficult job, I think it's the most difficult job in corporate America for one primary reason. You have two bosses you're responsible for, the employer and the employees.
Yeah.
They see the same issue from terribly different views. You ever been in a debate with a Republican or Democrat on the same issue? I'm not talking politics. I'm just giving you the frame of reference of what that might be. So all of a sudden you're thinking in this way about your job that doesn't really jive, or you have to be able to navigate through how people are seeing those issues and being able to correctly articulate yourself in a way. And I think as a result of all that, I think in order to be ready for work, you have to get a good night's sleep. It's statistically proven we need 7 hours of sleep every single night. And I've been adamant in tracking this for 3 years. I'm a different person because of it. Number two, we must get up and move around and exercise. Some form of exercise. There's a debate around cardio and muscle building exercises. You can debate it one way or the other. Do something for 30 minutes. Do something for yourself for 30 minutes. I think it's important. Next, sore subject. I'm not sitting here to tell you what you should eat or put in your mouth, but your diet. My mom used to always say, your food is the fuel for your body, John. And for 40 years, I didn't listen to her. And now all of a sudden, I wish I had earlier on. And then lastly is meditation. And to be honest with you, Mary, if I'll give you a little bit of insight, I had a very intense morning the day of this recording. And 2 minutes before I got on this show, I literally sat in my favorite chair and I meditated for 2 minutes. And I said a quick prayer. And I visualized how this was going to go, and I went on with my day. And so I was mentally prepared for what was coming at me at work, because we all know in human resources, it is not a dull moment. And if you are not prepared for that sport of human resources or that challenge of doing HR in an amazingly awesome way, you all of a sudden, as we all know, when we're depressed or we are overwhelmed and something new comes on our plate, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't deal with this. Get away from me. I don't have any time for it. I don't have the bandwidth, etc. We must take care of ourselves. As a matter of fact, I built a keynote called Upside Down HR about the criticality of human resource professionals investing in their well-being first in order for them to amplify the way that they serve their employee population.
I think it's a great reminder, and it does feel simple, But for whatever reason, and I'll put my hand up first and say, gosh, I've done this before. When you start getting really, really stressed at work, what do you go for? The snack machine in the cafe, which leads into terrible food at lunch, which leads into terrible sleep that night, which leads into not wanting to work out in the morning. And it's a cycle, which causes you to not be your very best when you show up at work. And you think about any of the great athletes out there, right? Serena Williams is not loading her body with lots of junk food and only getting 3 hours of sleep at night. Of course not. She trains to do the work that's, she's been called to. And so I think it is a helpful reminder. I know that I am a completely different person the next day when I get a good night's rest. And you're not getting the very best of me if I get crappy sleep. So I think if anything, this is not meant to be a moment of shaming people that are listening. It's a moment of like, just calibrate and, bringing the compass back to center and going, you know what, you're right. These are the things that help me stay level and calm and cool and collected at work, rather than sleep deprived, frazzled, and running on sugar and nerves. There's different, better ways to work, right?
In no form, in any way, shape, do I want to come across as shaming anyone or discouraging them whatsoever. I'm simply sharing my story because of a couple of things that happened to me, a health scare that got my attention, and I knew that I had to pivot some things I could control versus taking a more medicine-based diagnosis to cure what was going on. That was number one. Number two, I'm blessed to know Kathy Sullivan. And Kathy Sullivan wrote a book called Moms Eat First. And when she wrote the book, she reached out to me a few times because I had written my book and she was curious. And it is so important. And it reminded me of this idea that if we are not taking care of ourselves, we can't take care of others. And I know, again, I'll go back to when my kids were super young, I didn't get a lot of sleep because my kids were always up and I didn't eat as well and I didn't take care of myself. And luckily I was younger, so my metabolism worked. But the older that we get, those things start to change and we must be disciplined. And that, I think, is one of the most difficult parts for us as human beings. It is easier to grab the bag of potato chips than it is to grab a handful of blueberries. Simple as that.
Yeah.
And I know that. I do it. I am guilty of it all the time. And I try my best constantly to stay in this level of discipline because I know if I do those things, I will be better for myself, number one, for my family, number two, and for everyone else that I work with or I'm friends with. And that's my motivation for it.
100% agree. Now, let's pivot to a different topic. If HR operated like a startup, what would change first? How we hire, how we measure success, or how we experiment? What are your thoughts?
I truly think if HR started as a startup, they would become micro-focused on the business outcomes that are going to make the organization successful. And I think the number one thing that is the cringeworthy topic whenever I talk to human resource professionals is let's talk financials. Let's talk numbers. Let's talk how the business is doing. And all of a sudden they say to me, not all of them, but some of them, John, I got into HR because I like people and I really didn't do well in my accounting or math classes. Totally cool. I get it. It's fine. The challenge, no problem whatsoever. But if you're not going to immerse yourself into understanding how data can help you make informed decisions about the things you're going to devote time, energy, and resources into and ensure they're getting a return on your investment so that your business can actually excel and can survive this startup phase. Because oftentimes what I think happens in human resources is we get stuck in this rut of doing the same thing for open enrollment. HCM system comes up. Oh, now it's the summertime. We got to do the holiday party. That's going to happen now, as opposed to looking at it like, what do I need to do to make sure we're driving sales? What do I need to do in HR to make sure we're having the right people to maintain our cost of goods sold? What do we need to do to make sure our compression doesn't exist between the cost of goods sold and our actual sale price, so that all of a sudden our math is not mathing and we can't make money because our pricing's all off? And then let's get into the thing that human resources can control the most, indirect expenses. We all know the number one indirect expense is employee wage and benefits and everything that goes into that. How can you as an HR professional drive financial impacts to those numbers? If you do all those things, guess what happens? There's a greater form of net income that exists. And I'll give you a trick on net income. And this is one that I think really gets people kind of square between the eye. If you are listening out there and have ever been responsible for payroll, and for some reason, one of your employees didn't get paid, I know in my experience, everything stops. And all of a sudden, if it was Joe Smith that didn't get paid and Joe wasn't able to make his mortgage payment on a Friday because of a miss through payroll, the entire world stops. You end up ACHing or wiring money into Joe's account, and all of a sudden he's paid because he was shorted what the expectation was. What if we treated net income just like we do an employee? What if we treated net income as our budget that we have for net income is 12% and we're at 9%. So we're actually shorting net income their pay. Why are we not stopping the world like we do when an employee doesn't get paid properly and fixing that issue? Sometimes the reason why I think it happens is that it impacts people. And that's challenging and not something any of us want to do, but I'm sure many of your listeners have been through a reduction in force. But I think as a startup, you have to become so business focused on surviving and getting through this startup phase. And it's all about being able to drive sales, manage costs of goods sold, manage those indirect expenses so that we actually have money left over and you have a business that produces a net profit. Because if you don't, you're just a nonprofit or it's just a hobby to somebody.
1,000 bazillion %. You're preaching to the choir here. And my prediction is, why do most HR people not think in this way? And I'm going to give them some grace. I think it's that their leaders are not sharing those numbers with them, right? So they're just focused on, we just got to get payroll out. This is my 10 tasks I do on payroll week. In any given day, I just got to blow through this to get to Friday, right? Or, an employee relations manager might just be like, well, these are the things I focus on. But by connecting the dots, and I encourage anyone that's listening, please share this episode with your manager or people leader. Share it with your CHRO or your chief people officer and say, hey, you know what? This year, I want to have a better grasp on revenue versus expenses and net income for our overall company. Will you please just share those when you get that information from the board or from the executive team? And, ask for those things, because I think if you don't ask, you don't know, and you just keep on doing your silly little checklist, which keeps you very much in a tactical box and not thinking big picture strategically. Because I think as an entrepreneurial person myself, my parents were entrepreneurs as well. You think in these ways because you are the one turning the crank. You have your finger on the pulse at all times because you're the one that's driving sales, pitching clients, bringing new business in. And if you stop turning the crank, guess what? No one else is, unless you've got a sales director to your business. And so I just think part of it is just knowing to even ask those questions to your direct leader, or maybe your HR BP, those business partners that are in your organization, and say, hey, you know what, this year, I really want to understand the math behind our business and what looks like thriving and what looks like surviving. And I think that would start to change the dynamic as a whole, right?
Totally. I'm going to butcher his name. Mike Makovlich wrote a book named Profit First. And he talks about this concept of understanding how your organization makes money. And here's what I would share with you: a couple things. Number one, about 7 years ago, we started disclosing financial information inside of my organization. I saw material change in the empowerment of my employees and the ideation that came. For the prior 8 years, I carried the burden of that as well as the success of it entirely by myself. And at one point when we were at a low dip in my business, I thought to myself, this business might not be around and nobody knows it. And that was a very, very eye-opening experience. I work with an outside consultant. We built a model, be able to share our financial statements with our employees on a quarterly basis. My leadership team gets them on a monthly basis. The reason why that's so important is that we need to empower our leaders to have the data that the person that's responsible for business gets. And it's hard sometimes, I know, because I work with multi-generational families. A lot of the CEOs don't want to show the financials because of how much money they're making, or worse, how bad the business is. Here's why I think it's critical that you share it with them. Employees go to work 40 hours a week. And there is a significant challenge around financial wellness in our country and in our world. And I believe if they are given the opportunity to understand how their business's financials work and the impact they have and other departments have on the financials, they'll become better employees. They'll become better investors. So when they go and buy a stock through their Robinhood account or Charles Schwab, they'll actually look at the financial statement, not just, oh, NVIDIA is a hot stock, I'll buy it, even though its net income is down or its revenues have declined or whatever the case is. We as employees need to cheat off of our employer in a way that allows us to gain knowledge and information while we're at work that we can then use at home. That's why developing soft skills through your organization, like emotional intelligence and relationship building and problem solving, my guess is those skills transfer into your personal life. And I would tell you to steal, not money, but steal the opportunity that you're given as an employer, that your employer gives you to grow as a professional, and highly encourage your leadership team at the very minimum to get access to their financial data, and preferably that all employees have some form of access to it, because then they can be way more informed in how their job affects the bottom line.
Bottom line, 100%. It's being well informed gives you that autonomy, gives you that ability to innovate and think, you know what? Why do we do this particular workflow that way? Why don't we simplify down? Why don't we really make a plan for investing in this bit of software in the next couple of years? And how do we get there? Because I think a large part of HR also is thinking about, especially if your company is evolving to a skills-based organization, you got to think about the skills that you have now in your organization versus what you want to develop next. And that helps you make financially sound investments and take educated risks towards improving and innovating inside your company. Now, John, as we wrap up, I know you've got a new book coming out, and I really want to ask you about that. Payroll Like a Boss, second book. It's going to be released this April. Give us a little quick overview of what to expect in that book.
I know human resource professionals feel the challenge of not having a seat at the table. Your colleagues in payroll, or some of you in HR that also do payroll, are relegated even further down that particular rung inside of an organizational hierarchy. Here's the thing. Payroll is the most critical business function inside of any organization. If we do not pay our employees, we do not have a business. If we do not have funds to pay our employees, we do not have a business. If we decide, hey, I'm going to skimp on my IRS payments and save that money for something else, CEO, CFO, you're going to go to jail. As a result of that, there's a great community of payroll professionals who are some of the most caring and giving, that would take the shirt off of their back to help another employee. They have the same challenge of hyper-focus on time and accurate and compliant payroll. That is absolutely fundamental. It must be done. But Payroll Like a Boss is helping them look at themselves and their career and their role as something way more meaningful for that. The primary thing in the book that we talk about is bravery and confidence within those payroll professionals. And at the same time, using the insights they have from leveraging their HR technology to take data points like labor cost and use that as a way to analyze the success or failure of a department, of an individual employee, and be able to share that information with executive leaders to help them more effectively run their business. I'm so excited. I have a co-author, Tammy Gillenwater. She's the best and greatest payroll professional that I know. We have a great launch on April 28th that we'll be having the book come out. And then right after that, we'll be at the largest payroll service providers annual client conference to kick off the book and give away hundreds of books to all their clients. We're so excited, and I appreciate you giving me a chance to give it a plug.
Of course. And if you want to see what John's doing out in the world, there are a couple of websites I'll give you, hrlikeaboss.com and then willery.com. There are also his social media links connecting with him on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'll have all of those links in the show notes over at thesimplifiers.com. And now you, my friend, are a fellow podcaster. And I hear that every listener can gain access to HR Like a Boss's podcast, and they'll actually get 25 free SHRM or HRCI professional development credits. So make sure to check that out. You got some more podcasts to put in the queue when you're commuting to work or on the treadmill at the gym. So I highly recommend going and checking those things out. Now, John, as we wrap up, I've got a couple of questions I like to ask all of our guests. So here they come, rapid fire. First one's this: what's one book or blog that you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system?
Outlive the Science and Era of Longevity by Dr. Peter Attia. And I love the concept and idea around the data of the things that we can do to prolong the well-being of ourselves and the ability for us to manage data and insights. There's a lot of details in it, but specifically getting a baseline, a marker of where you are in regards to your health and the things you can do to improve it.
Brilliant. We'll link that up in the show notes for you guys if you're curious about it. Again, thesimplifiers.com. Now, tell me, who's somebody in your network, somebody you know personally that you just feel is up to brilliant things? If we could shine a spotlight on them, and who knows, maybe one day we'll have them on the podcast. Who would that be?
Mary, you should definitely have Catherine Fry on your podcast. Catherine with a K, Fry with an F-R-Y. She lives out in the Aspen, Colorado area. I met her at the Maryland SHRM annual conference. I was doing the opening keynote. She was doing the closing keynote. Regretfully, I was not able to see her because I had another commitment the day of her presentation. She does something called the HR Empower Hour. She's super committed and devoted to the human resource profession. You probably will see, if you follow her on LinkedIn, she's dropping videos once or twice a week. She has an infectious personality. She is so passionate and caring for human resource professionals. Make sure you check out Catherine Fry.
Brilliant. Again, we'll link it up in the show notes. I believe that simplicity and gratitude go hand in hand. Tell me, what are you grateful for today?
I'm grateful for my relationship with God and the peace that brings me every single day. I do everything for His glory. And at the same time, I feel very blessed to have clarity on my purpose of making an impact. And that guides me in all the decisions and the things that I need to do, in the spirit of being the best husband, the best father, the best friend, the best CEO, the best author, the best keynote speaker I can be. I feel very, very fortunate to have a life full of my faith, at the same time, clarity on what I'm here on earth to do.
It's beautiful, John. Thank you for sharing that. My final question for you is this. Someone somewhere is listening to you and I right now, and they are thinking, you know what? I have been part of the 80% for way too long. And I'm a people person working in HR. I'd like to make a change. What's the one thing you could whisper into their ear right now just to encourage them in this moment?
Wow. There's so many things. You told me one. I'm going to start with an inner reflection on themselves and look at their own emotions, how they're taking care of themselves. What are they doing that can increase their chances of being the best possible version of themselves? Never comparing you against anyone else other than who you were the day before. That would be my main encouragement.
John, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Mary, you're awesome. This is fantastic. I will have you on the HR Like a Boss podcast as a little podcast swap. We can switcheroo. I will not be as prepared as you were, but I did the best that I possibly could, and hopefully your audience enjoyed it.
Thanks again.